He was an able general, a man of organizational ability, resourceful, and decisive. On the other hand, he was an ambitious opportunist, vengeful, cunning, and at times unscrupulous. What we know about Joab.
History is meaningful if we learn from it. Technology changed a lot, but the basic human feelings and needs are the same. This episode part of a series which speaks about people who are mentioned in the Bible. Thanks for all who would like to support this channel. Please, if you can subscribe, or give a like, or a meaningful comment. In the description you may find other opportunities to support this channel. Enjoy.
He is the second of 3 sons of David's sister or half-sister Zeruiah. Joab was therefore the nephew of David. His brothers were Abishai and Asahel. In identifying these 3 men, the mother's name is recorded rather than the father's, because she was David's sister. Thus the relationship of David to the 3 men is made clear. Joab was at the head of David's men at the time Ishbosheth the son of Saul ruled over all Israel with the exception of the tribe of Judah, which clung to David. The servants of Ishbosheth and those of David were drawn up against one another at the pool of Gibeon, Ishbosheth's forces being under command of Saul's uncle Abner, who had been responsible for putting Ishbosheth on the throne. As the men sat facing one another, Abner suggested a combat between 12 men from each side. When they grabbed hold of one another by the head, each ran his opponent through with the sword, all falling down dead together. Since the issue was not settled by the combat, a full-scale battle resulted. Account afterward revealed that Ishbosheth's forces lost 360 men, and David's, only 20. During the fight, as Abner fled, Joab's fleet-footed brother Asahel pursued Abner. Despite remonstrances and warnings from Abner, Asahel persisted until finally Abner thrust backward with the butt end of his spear, piercing him through. Reaching the hill of Ammah, Abner and his men gathered on its top, from which Abner made appeal to stop the fighting in order to avoid bitterness and endless slaughter. Joab here demonstrated practical wisdom by heeding the appeal and returning to David at Hebron. But Joab's desire for vengeance, nevertheless, smoldered in him, and he waited for opportunity to satisfy it. In the meantime he engaged in a drawn-out war with Saul's house, which constantly declined, while David grew stronger. Eventually Abner, offended at Ishbosheth over a personal matter, made a covenant with David, promising to bring all Israel over to David's side. Joab strongly disagreed with the transaction, charging Abner with being a spy. But pretending friendship for Abner, Joab caught Abner off guard and slew him in revenge for his brother Asahel. He may also have felt that he was at the same time eliminating a possible rival for the post of commander of David's army. When David heard of the murder, he disclaimed guilt for his own house before all Israel and said, "May it whirl back upon the head of Joab and upon the entire house of his father, and let there not be cut off from Joab's house a man with a running discharge or a leper, one diseased, or a man taking hold of the twirling spindle, perhaps, one crippled, or one falling by the sword or one in need of bread." David did not act at this time against Joab and Abishai, who connived with Joab in the murder, because, as he said, "I today am weak although anointed as king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too severe for me." Commander of the armies of Israel. After David had been anointed as king of all Israel, he went up against Jerusalem, Jebus. The Jebusites taunted David, thinking that their position was unassailable. But David saw that the city was vulnerable through its water tunnel. Hence, he offered the position as head and prince to anyone who would climb up the tunnel and be first to strike the Jebusites. Joab went up, the city fell to David, and Joab was rewarded with the high position of commander of the armies of Israel. As commander, Joab had a body of 10 personal attendants bearing his weapons, among whom was the mighty man Naharai the Beerothite. After David's conquest of Edom, Joab remained there for 6 months in an effort to destroy every male among them. Later, Joab manifested military leadership in the fight with the Ammonites and Syrians, putting his brother Abishai in charge of one division, to defeat a pincer movement of the enemy forces. He doubtless played a large part in the other battles fought by David against the Philistines, the Moabites, and others. At the siege of Rabbah of Ammon, Joab appeared to evince loyalty to David. He took the city of waters, possibly meaning that part of the city containing its water supply or the fort protecting its water supply. With this vital part of the city taken, the capital city could not hold out much longer, and surrender would be inevitable. Instead of pressing the siege of the city to a successful climax by himself, Joab, whether actually out of respect for the king, for Israel's good, or for his own advancement, seemed to show the supportive attitude. He said that he preferred to have the anointed king complete the capture of the enemy's royal city and earn the fame for this exploit, even though he, Joab, had done the vital preliminary work. It was during the siege of Rabbah that David sent a letter by Uriah telling Joab to place Uriah in the heaviest part of the battle so that he would be killed. Joab went along with the arrangement in full cooperation, but in his report to the king on the outcome of the battle, he adroitly used the fact to block David from reprimanding him because he had lost valiant men in the battle by sending them too close to the city wall. In his report Joab said, "Some of the servants of the king died, and your servant Uriah the Hittite also died." As Joab had calculated, David's answer contained no tone of displeasure but one of encouragement to Joab. It was Joab who, after Absalom had been in banishment for 3 years for slaying his half-brother Ammon, sent a woman from Tekoa to David, putting words in her mouth to appeal for Absalom's return. The appeal was successful, and Joab brought Absalom back to Jerusalem, though David would not see Absalom. 2 years later Absalom repeatedly requested Joab to come and approach the king in his behalf, but Joab declined. Finally Absalom resorted to the device of setting Joab's barley field afire, which brought a quick and angry response from Joab. Absalom was then able to give the reason for his act, and he induced Joab to see the king to bring about restoration of Absalom to David's favor. Though Joab supported Absalom's cause in achieving his return, when Absalom rebelled, Joab supported David. David placed Joab in charge of a third part of his men, with strict orders to deal gently with Absalom. But during the fight Joab disobeyed David's order and killed Absalom. But he had the courage to speak in a bold, direct manner to David afterward, when David's mourning for Absalom endangered the unity of the kingdom. Evidently because of Joab's disobedience in the killing of Absalom, David replaced Joab as chief of the army, appointing Amasa. Amasa, however, did not prove to be the general that Joab had been. When commanded by David to call the men of Judah together to fight the rebel Sheba the son of Bichri, Amasa called Judah, but he came later than the time appointed by David. Because the matter was urgent, David commissioned Abishai to go after Sheba, saying, "That he may not actually find for himself fortified cities and escape before our eyes." In the ensuing fight, Joab appears to have taken the lead as he had done when army chief. At the siege of Abel of Beth-Makkah that followed, the citizens of the town threw Sheba's head over the wall at Joab's bidding, and Joab spared the city, withdrawing and returning to Jerusalem. During the pursuit of Sheba, Joab committed a grave crime. As Amasa, who was his cousin, came to meet him near Gibeon, Joab let his sword fall out of its sheath. Picking it up, he held it conveniently in his left hand as he took hold of Amasa's beard with his right hand, as if to kiss him. Because Amasa was off guard, Joab was able to kill him with one thrust of his sword. It is true that Joab may have had some distrust of Amasa because he had headed Absalom's rebellious army. But be that as it may, Joab, the opportunist, seized on a time of emergency and strife to advance his personal career by murdering his rival. David may have deferred action against Joab because of Amasa's recent connections with Absalom and the fact that Joab had only recently fought the rebel forces of Absalom under Amasa's leadership. According to Joab's ambitious wishes, he was again made head of the army. Why did David fail to execute Joab when he murdered Abner? And why did he reappoint Joab as general over the army after he had also murdered Amasa, who had been made general to replace Joab? The Bible does not say. If it was weakness in enforcing God's law, it may have been because of the strength and influence of Joab and his family in the army. Or there may have been other circumstances that the Bible does not relate. At any rate, it must be remembered that David, though not executing Joab for some reason, whether good or bad, did not forgive him, but he charged Solomon his son and successor to see that Joab paid for his badness. Despite his previous service under David, when David became old and sick, Joab forsook David and joined the conspiracy of David's son Adonijah. Perhaps he did this because he felt that, with Adonijah as king, he would be the power behind the throne, or it may be that he felt more sure of his position with Adonijah than with Solomon. When he heard that Solomon had been made king by David, he forsook Adonijah. Later, when Adonijah was killed, Joab ran to the tent of Jehovah and took hold of the horns of the altar. This furnished no sanctuary for him, for he was a deliberate murderer. Therefore Solomon sent Benaiah to execute him there. Thus Solomon carried out David's deathbed counsel to him not to let the gray hairs of Joab go down in peace to Sheol, because of the blood guilt on Joab for his murder of Abner and Amasa, 2 men more righteous and better than he was. Joab was buried in his own house in the wilderness. Thereafter Benaiah was made head of the army.